we're gonna find out what the best tool is that you can use to increase your speed, and we're gonna start right now. So one of the most frustrating things as a coach can be when you line up all of your training and you're looking at like, I'm gonna get this guy to be the absolute best freak of nature ever. They've got all the weight room numbers, and then they get on the field and they're slow. You start to see that they don't have a motor, that they're just struggling to figure out how to apply that horizontal force to actually run quickly. And so to improve speed, we have to start to think about what exercises might we be using in the weight room, what different tools that we can use, what cues we can provide, what technique work we can enhance their running capability with. And then that starts to bring up other areas like, well, maybe you don't have enough room, maybe there's not enough space for you to run, 30, 40, 50-yard sprints that you can try to increase their overall speed and acceleration. And maybe even a lot of these athletes struggle to implement cues at a high speed. They struggle to take that cue and then apply that cue at a very high speed when they're trying to run because they lack that coordination. They lack that maybe proprioception, that ability to help their body learn. Is there a tool out there? Is there a piece of equipment that's different from just traditional weight training that can actually help us increase an athlete's speed? Or maybe if you're an athlete yourself, is there a tool that you can use to increase your speed? So first, we have to identify what is speed. How is speed defined? And if we look at speed as the measurement of a rate of motion, so the measurement of how someone is moving over a given distance, that takes us into then understanding, okay, how can we start? How do we get someone to go from being static to starting to move to accelerating as quickly as possible? So they have to have some overcoming strength because they're at this static start position, and then they have to have a very high rate of coordination to be able to accelerate, to be able to go from 0 to top speed as quickly as possible. That's the sort of the outcome that we're gonna be looking for, is how to get from that 0 to top speed as quickly as possible. And that brings up acceleration and the role that acceleration plays in speed. I like to think about acceleration as a car that's stick shift, that's a standard transmission, and you're in first gear. Let's say it's a 5 speed. How quickly can you go from first gear to 5th gear? And then when you're even in 5th gear, how quickly can you get to the top speed of that vehicle? So that would be acceleration. So what we're really gonna be training when we're thinking about speed and its transfer to sports is the acceleration. How quickly can we shift through those different gears to get to top speed? Think about a baseball player, they're lefty, they hit the ball into right field. How quickly can they get out of the batter's box and get down to first base? That's gonna show what their acceleration rate is. And really, that's the key component that we're gonna be looking for when we're training speed. And we can even bring in a little bit of that max speed discussion. So how can we get to that top end speed of the vehicle, and then how long can the vehicle hold that top speed? Basically, how big is their gas tank? Now, with human beings, that's a lot different. It's not gonna be over that long period of time based off the size of how much gas is in their body, but instead it's actually gonna be based around something similar, like how long can they hold that based off of their glycogen storage and how efficient they are and how long they can hold that really good posture to be at max speed. So it's gonna be a very short time frame that max speed actually has an impact on our athletes. So really that just takes us right back to focusing on the start, focusing on max acceleration so that we can get to that top speed. So we went over a max speed, acceleration, start, and I'm gonna introduce a term that has not been used. We've hinted at it a little bit here and there on YouTube, on our channel, and we're gonna go deeper into this, and that's transient speed. So transient speed would be known as the speed that someone would need that is carried over to multiple different sports, but it's essentially a means of identifying agility. I love using the example of John Smith or Jordan Burroughs shooting a double leg or shooting a low single. Think about Nick Chubb hitting a hole and being very shifty in that hole. He's gonna have transient speed in the hole so that he can get out and juke a linebacker. Think about a basketball player being very quick when they cross somebody over, they take a step back, hit that 3. That's an example of transient speed that the sporting world that we don't really have an identification for. We know what it is. We know those athletes are fast, but we haven't really put a term on it so that we can train that universally in the weight room through different means of training. And so I really believe transient speed is what transfers to all different sports, especially in that open skilled arena where they're out on a field, they're out on a court. That's where we're gonna see people being fast, but not in the traditional sense of running with acceleration, of running a 40 or a 60, but instead we're gonna see it in a sport-specific transient carryover. And even when we're taking transient speed, we wanna look at the simple force application. If we have an athlete that needs to go from point A to point B in a very short time frame and then maybe step back and they cut to another point C, that's gonna be, again, transient speed. And what we wanna think about is what's needed. And so typically when we're looking through speed on the track, right, we're gonna see horizontal projection, horizontal force, and we're also going to see vertical force. Typically, when we're looking at transient speed, yes, there is still going to be vertical force, but most of our focus needs to be on horizontal force in a short box, in a short time frame, in a short distance to get to point B to then get to point C. So we need to look for exercises or specific tools that will train that horizontal force output and that can lead to improving the physical output and the physical efficiency of the individual. And that's going to take us into what that tool is. And that tool is, drum roll please, the resisted sled. So ironically, when I first started getting into sports performance, now this is back when I was 14, 15 years old, so back in 1999, 1998, 2000, 98 to 2000, we were under the impression that sleds were good, but they could make you slower because they could hinder your technique, which in turn could actually make you slower. The downfall of that is that most people just don't even know how to run. So, so that doesn't really hold true. So what about the sled actually will carry over to increasing speed, to increasing acceleration, to enhancing our transient speed? So why the sled? The first key concept is that there's gonna be less braking force because there's resistance behind the individual. So that makes it a little bit easier to execute cues. I believe it's a little bit easier to execute some technical work that you might be looking for. The second key concept is that there's going to be a greater amount of horizontal application of force. Think about the load is behind the individual, so we're going to have a steeper shin angle, we're going to have our chest leaning forward, and that's gonna force us to focus on that horizontal force production. And so if we think about horizontal force output, that is going to be a pivotal sign of acceleration. And that third key concept is that the athlete will actually have greater ground contact time because they have a sled behind them, which enables them to learn propulsive force. So they learn how to actually apply more force to travel forward. So they learn how to essentially propel themselves a little bit more effectively, how to push the ground, how to push the earth away from themselves so they get more force reaction to move forward. Now this brings up the question, if we want to focus on resisted sled work, should we load it with 400 pounds? Should the weight on the sled be based off of the athlete's body weight? Should it be based off of their back squat, their single leg squat? Should we focus on just starting at a lower load on the sled? So that brings up a lot of different questions. And especially if you're limited by the facility that you have and you just want to do sled work, maybe you're in a development and you want to run sled sprints, just in front of your house. How can you figure out what load to put on the sled? And then not only are we going to be focused on what load should we be putting on the sled, but also how can we fit this into our overall periodization? So there's a couple questions. Once we start to recognize the resisted sled can drastically increase someone's acceleration, but how much weight? How do we implement this into training? And then ultimately, where do we put this in a given day? Before we get into the rest of the video around why sled-based training is important, there's one key component behind training on sleds, and that's going to be that you have to make sure that you're recovering as well as possible. That's exactly why we recommend earth-fed muscle whey protein. It's grass-fed whey protein, and if you're looking to increase that power production, stack that whey protein with TRANSIENT creatine. That's going to improve your overall rate of force development, and it's going to lead to you recovering quicker from those hard sled workouts. Now, let's get to the rest of the video. And so based off the research, we've seen that anywhere from 10% of body mass on a sled all the way up to about 40 to 42% of body mass, we've seen that athletes have had a positive reaction to sled-based work. So if I weigh 200 pounds and there's 20 pounds on the sled, and I can do 6 sets of 20-yard resisted sprints with the sled behind me in tow, I will see an increase in acceleration over a long period of time. Now, I believe using body mass as a guide is not the best because it doesn't factor in a specific strength. It doesn't factor in twitch types for specific athletes. Some athletes can handle a little bit more because they can coordinate at higher speeds than what that body mass would actually show, but it is a simple baseline where you could start at 10% or 15% of body mass on a sled if you're in the development and you just want to train and you want to figure this out. The best way is likely to figure out a velocity decrement, and this velocity decrement would be based off of an unresisted sprint. Okay, so we could get 100% of your time in unresisted form. So let's say you run a 20-meter sprint, and then over time we want to see half speed decrement. So we see this massive decrease, we figure out the formula, and then that enables us to recognize for that specific individual what amount of load needs to be on the sled. That puts us in a more relative situation where some athletes might have 50 pounds and some athletes that weigh 200 pounds might only have 20 pounds on the sled. I would recommend, if you don't have access to equipment or to people who can actually analyze velocity decrements, and if you do want to know more about this, comment down below in the comment section and we will do a video on velocity decrement for sled training. But anyway, if we go forward, I would recommend just start with 10 to 20% of your body mass and then see how you feel and gradually build into that. In most cases, we want to see resisted sleds programmed based around a dynamic day or based around an entire day in and of itself. So if you downloaded our programming template, which you can by clicking on the link down below, head over to garagestrength.com, put in your email address and you'll get our programming template. If you downloaded that, you'll see that there's an athlete day. I feel this would be a great day to put in 6 by 20 meter sled sprints with 20 to 25 pounds depending upon your body mass. Now you can put that in as your number 1 or number 2 exercise on that athlete day. If you don't want to do that on day 3, then on day 4, which would also be a dynamic day, you could use the sled to replace technical coordination, or you could warm up with some technical coordination movements and then put the sled into 2A and have the sled be the main priority for the entire dynamic focus. That's going to lead to an increase in your acceleration and even in most cases an increase in your starting position. So to recap everything around resisted sled training, we know that a lot of athletes struggle with that horizontal force production, with that horizontal force application. We know that they don't produce force rapidly or they don't coordinate rapidly either, and then they struggle because they're not as coordinated. They struggle to apply those cues. And what sled training does is it forces that time frame to get lengthened a little bit so they have more ground contact time, and it's going to help individuals who tend to be a little bit slower to actually increase their mechanics and to actually feel how to drive a little bit more effectively. In the meantime, if you are an elite world-class athlete or you're more coordinated than most individuals, it's also going to be beneficial to you. And then that next step that we covered is going over what that load would be and what program day that would go on. Again, I would recommend athlete day or dynamic day. And if you don't have access to velocity decrement measuring, then I would just say start at 10 to 20% of your body mass, start a little bit lighter, do 6 sets, and then see how you feel over time. Ideally, you would do sled training once a week, and after about 6 to 8 weeks, you will notice an increase in your acceleration and in your overall speed. If you need help with your overall speed, you feel slow, you're sluggish, and you want to get faster, we have a program. It's the How to Get Faster speed training program that we put together to help all of you freaks out there become more explosive and more coordinated as individuals. So you can click on the link down below, head over to garagestrength.com, pick up our How to Get Faster speed training program today. Until next time, guys, make sure that you always cultivate your power. Peace.